Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Nonprofit World, produced by Sarah DeGraff. I'm the guest host today, Jeff Grandy, and I want to thank you for tuning in. And we have a wonderful guest, interesting guest today. Her name is Ms. Janet Wade-Utay. She was born in Virginia, grew up in Virginia, and has been in resident of South Windsor for the last 23 years. And we're going to talk to her about her occupation, some of her activities, some very, very interesting things that she's been involved in that I think will be of great interest to you. Want to welcome you, Janet.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate that. I'm glad to be here today.
Now, thank you. You're retired now.
I am.
You were an engineer at Pratt & Whitney.
Yes.
Tell us about that.
Well, my degree is in electrical engineering. I have both a bachelor's and master's degree. And
Where'd you go? Where'd you go to school?
Virginia Tech.
And why did you get into engineering? How did you get into?
Well, I knew when I was growing up that I was good at math and science, but was worried. And of course, during that time, teaching was the direction that a guidance counselor would direct someone who's good in math and science, and a female. But I also knew that I had been raised in a pretty well-disciplined family, and was worried that I would be too much of a disciplinarian. And then my father also was an engineer, so I got to see what he was doing while I was growing up, and I said, I'm going to give it a try.
Okay, and you got your degree in what?
Both my bachelor's and master's in electrical engineering. At Virginia Tech, because at that time there was really high demand, and I was very fortunate at the end of my 4-year career to be accepted into a graduate program as a graduate research assistant. Did a lot of work in optical fiber interferometry before optical fibers are everywhere today. They're in communications devices and everything, but when I was in school, they were just coming out, and so had a great experience with that research project.
So have you had a hand in developing that new field of optics?
Not so much in aerospace, but what it led me to was this whole idea of needing to be able to develop non-invasive inspection techniques for aircraft parts, because if you cut up an aircraft part, you can't put it in an engine, but we want to know that aircraft parts are good before we put them in an engine. And so my work in what we call non-destructive engineering in my graduate research led me into my career in aerospace, which was developing inspection techniques for new materials and aircrafts.
How did you get from Virginia Tech with your master's degree to Pratt & Whitney? What brought you up here? Were you recruited?
Yes, but I had a few steps in between. I was originally recruited into the nuclear industry, where again I was spent 3 years with a group that was developing inspection techniques. I graduated right after 3 Mile Island. Just some people may remember that, but it was one of the worst nuclear accidents in this country, but by no means harmful as some of the other incidents that have happened since then. And so I worked there in a consortium helping the electric utilities develop inspection techniques, then moved into aerospace in Arizona at a company called Garrett, and finally found my way to Pratt for the last 20 years of my career. So it was a very interesting journey, but always fulfilling, I think.
What was it like working at Pratt & Whitney? From what we were talking about before, my guess is that most of your coworkers in the engineering department were probably men, because men get those degrees.
Yes, they do. Yes, they do. And the majority, it was a heavily male industry, and yet I found always that people are people, and that once if we worked together to solve a problem, I always tried to find common ground. And when I encountered those people that felt like I shouldn't be an engineer, I would always try to build a personal relationship. And most of the time at Pratt, I was very happy with my career, working with others, whether it was men or women or new graduates or very seasoned people. I always sought out my seniors, if you will. We were blessed at that time to have many people that were highly experienced, had spent their entire careers at Pratt. And so as we were trying to develop new inspection techniques for new engines, I found understanding the problems that they faced very, very helpful.
So you did feel that, for the most part, you were welcomed by your male counterparts.
Absolutely, yeah. You
didn't feel any discomfort there.
Well, there are always awkward times, and yet the awkward times, half of it is how we react to it. If I made a big deal of it, then it likely might not go the best way. If I looked at it and just asked more questions and tried to find a common ground, that I could find a way for us to work together.
Well, that's a pretty long, productive career as an engineer. What did you find most rewarding about the work that you did as an engineer at Pratt & Whitney?
I would say there are really two things. Toward the end, the last 10 or 15 years of my career, I moved into an area called continuous improvement. And what we were doing there was looking at how do we improve the quality of our products and the efficiency with which we produce them. So that whole idea of constant learning, taking the best practices of each mechanic on the shop floor, if you will, and incorporating those. So I found that to be extremely rewarding when we could make a better product. And the second thing that I found most rewarding was when I moved into supervision, being in a position to hire our next generation of engineers, being in a position after being at the company to mentor other engineers and be an influence to help people want to stay in engineering, because aerospace used to be very glamorous in the early days, and now today it's much more in the tech industries and things like that. And we still have a tremendous need in aerospace for highly qualified and inquisitive young engineers. And so some of my most rewarding experiences were working with young engineers and trying to help them to realize the same passion that I have for engineering and aerospace.
So there's a lot of it. There's the working with people aspect was a rewarding.
Yes.
To you.
Yes.
And how you worked there for 23 years.
Yes.
How long ago did you retire?
I retired in 2019, so just a little over 2 years ago.
And what have you been doing since you retired?
Well, it's been an interesting time. I never dreamed that I would go on this path, but I've been working. My husband and I, we live in a house that's 150 years old, so trying to finish some projects there. We enjoy doing those. He's also an engineer. And also working with volunteer organizations. I've been active in my church and active in volunteer projects. I've continued to work with Habitat for Humanity when they started building houses again after COVID, and just finding the volunteerism really my joy. It brings me joy.
Habitat for Humanity, that was Jimmy Carter's?
Yes, it is.
That, right?
He started that. Amazing.
And are they they're still building that Habitat for Humanity? They build houses in our country.
Yes, all over the world. All over the world.
Oh, all over the world too.
Yes. And the houses, the builds that I've been on have always been local. When I lived in Arizona, I built a house there, worked with a team from my church that built a house. And then here in Connecticut also, we through our church, we've had volunteer groups that have helped.
Well, what was your part in building it? Did you design it, or did you physically
I
bang
wish.
nails
No, this
and
is
stuff, or what?
this is physically banging nails
Wow.
and putting putting trusses up. The time that I was volunteering here, we were really still framing the house, and it's just a wonderful time because you have a few supervisors, if you will, on the site that are usually construction professionals, and then they lead the volunteers, including the family that will live in the house, in whatever activity is being done. And sometimes it's as simple as painting if you're getting on the finished end, or in the case we were raising trusses on the second floor to get that would eventually become the attic and the roof as well.
So you build a Habitat for Humanity. You build houses from top to bottom. You don't renovate. You build a brand new house.
In general, I think they do build brand new houses. In some cases, if they're fortunate enough to have a house that can be renovated, but the projects that I have been on have been ground up new construction.
And how do you determine, or how does the Habitat for Humanity determine what people get these houses? How do they choose that?
They have an amazing interview process that I am less familiar with, but basically people who meet the criteria, for instance, are in need of housing and don't have the ability or the means for housing and are willing to put in what's called sweat equity into the house. They're interviewed and selected through the Habitat for Humanity organization, and once they are selected, then they become aware of which house will be theirs, and they join the volunteer teams and put in a certain number of hours of volunteer time into building their own home. And it's just phenomenal to see the ribbon cutting at the end when the keys are handed over to the occupants. It's just a wonderful.
And you're there to see that?
We are always invited, and I have been lucky enough to attend one ceremony, and it's just a great time to see that.
It must be very gratifying to.
Yes, very definitely.
And besides the Habitat, were there other volunteers? That's just the last 3 years now.
Mm-hmm.
What else? Any other volunteering?
Well, prior to that, even through my career, I was able to volunteer on some mission trips for my church. We, for Hurricane Katrina, we got connected with an organization in D'Iberville, Mississippi, that was rebuilding homes after that. And so I found my Arizona Habitat experience served me well there, because when, again, we went down for a whole week, and they split about 12 of us up into 4 different work crews, and each work crew went to a house, and we had a certain thing we need to accomplish. And so because I knew about framing and everything, in that case, I helped lead a team that was trying to the house had already been stripped down of all the flood and stuff, and bleached and all that stuff, and so we were going in to put in drywall to rebuild. And so that experience has been wonderful, and working also with other organizations like Hands on Hartford, which is an organization in Hartford that seeks to help the underserved with various needs, from a food pantry to teaching skills. They have an amazing cafe there and do catering. It's in downtown Hartford, and I should know the address. I will have to follow up with you. I can drive right there, and my father would not be happy that I couldn't tell you the address and exactly the directions. But anyway, it is in downtown Hartford.
Well, how did you learn, going back to the Habitat, how did you learn? Were there people there? I guess there were volunteers who were contractors and builders and stuff who volunteered. Mm-hmm. Is that how you learned to do the building part of it?
Yes. You learn from the supervisors that are on site. When you do the volunteering, you basically get taught whatever skill is needed for that day of building, and then you apply the skill and you have somebody looking over your shoulder, or being able to say, hey, I'm not sure this is right, help me out here, type of thing. So.
And what's your church?
My church is Westminster Presbyterian, right here in West Hartford. And
Oh, they're in West Hartford?
Yes, they are.
Westminster Presbyterian. Oh, is that the one on New Britain Avenue?
No, it's the one at the corner of Boulevard and Farmington Avenue, so it's just right a stone's throw from here.
Oh, yeah, okay, yeah, right. So you're a member there.
I'm a member there and have been delighted to be part of many service projects there, both here locally through Hands on Hartford or South Park Inn, which is another organization that's in downtown Hartford that serves clients who are currently suffering from homelessness. They serve a meal and they provide job counseling, skills, and housing and everything that you could imagine to help get people back on their feet.
There seems to be a commonality here that I'm picking up on. The Habitat, Hands on Hartford, the work with the church and so on, that has to do with helping people who, for whatever reason, have had some difficulties, struggling
Yes.
with their lives. What is it that what is it about Janet Wade-Utay that draws you to do that kind of work for those people?
I would have to say that I would have to credit my parents and the way I was raised, that always to be looking out for others. Also, I think my religious upbringing, I think God calls us to be servants to others. And the best thing that we can do is, no matter where we are, whether it was in my job or in my career or at Westminster, is to really be able to help others. My mother, I was one of 5 kids, so my mother spent a great deal of time raising the 5 kids. And my father was ever the engineer and always working to be the breadwinner, but both of them had amazing gifts. They taught us to love and look at the plight of others, not down, but in reaching out and making a difference. And so I have them to thank. And the short time that I remember my grandparents, sadly, my grandparents passed away when I was only about 6 or 7, but I also remember my grandmother and grandfather on my father's side as being also very generous and giving people.
And what besides the volunteerism and the church, are there other projects that you're also working on?
The other projects that I'm working on would be around our house. We have, we're lucky enough, we have 19 blueberry bushes, so this is the peak. The blueberry season has already passed, and now my raspberries are coming in like crazy. And as I say, our house is in need of being refinished and refurbished.
150-year-old house?
Yes, at least, yeah. Possibly as early as 1737, but the original house may have burned down.
1737.
That would be 200, yes.
Whoa.
It would be more than 200. But the historical renovator said, well, it's hard to tell. There's we need to do some more historical research, which is something I haven't gotten into, to follow up more on whether our house, perhaps the original Saltbuck's house may have burned and then been rebuilt in 1849-ish. Which is another pegged date for our house, possibly at least when the second story was added.
Have you researched anything about it, like to find out who used to live there? And
we have started that research. We haven't found anything when we have done some renovations. We haven't found anything too historically significant. We are part of the Windsor Farms historical district, but this was South Windsor was always a farming community. Main Street in South Windsor is the last street before you get to the Connecticut River, and so all the plots there were usually very long rectangular plots, so they could be plowed easily. They were all farms and things like that. So as far as we know, no one historic lived in our house, but many,
Probably a
many
farmer.
people. Yes,
Farmers.
probably a farmer, yes.
And so what your plot is like? Your house in the plot, like an acre? Or?
Yes, it's just over an acre. It's small compared to what it was originally. The plot that we're on was originally 4 more houses across that was subdivided through the years.
Well, an acre gives you plenty of room outside for your
It does.
blueberries and
Yes.
and
Raspberries.
raspberries.
Yep.
Do you buy those and grow them on your own, or were they already there?
Well, the blueberries were already there. We discovered those in our first year when I moved here. I came here in May, and then all of a sudden saw these bushes in June that had berries on them. I go, I think those are blueberries, but having never lived in Connecticut, I was not aware of how I quickly became aware of what blueberry bushes look like. And so we harvested them, and then through the years we've cleaned out the weeds around them, and after about the 3rd year, the birds discovered our blueberries. Why they were only going through the blackberries at first, but then they discovered the blueberries, so it became a fun project to try to build netting that would keep the birds out.
Wow. Well, what's taking up most of your time these days, Janet?
I would say what's taking most of my time these days, it's probably split between activities that support my church and also then activities around the house. During COVID, I took up 2 projects. One was to improve my voice because I've always sung and been active in music. So I'm taking voice lessons, and really that's kind of the joy of my life. I mean, many things bring me joy, but music particularly.
Does your church have a choir that you could join?
We do have a choir. I have been in a choir since I was 3 or 4 years old. I have pictures from my family of being in church singing in a choir as far as like 4. You know, at 4 I think we were making more of a joyful noise than singing, but so I've always sung in a church choir. And just the thing with COVID is you have to learn to sing into a camera and record your voice with no other sound around it, so all the voices can be mixed together. And so that was when I became aware that my voice had opportunity for improvement.
Right, right.
And I had the time, so I was able to take voice lessons. And then.
So are you still with the Habitat for Humanity? Do you still?
We're not currently building a Habitat house, but I hope to get involved again with the next mission project with our church that's local. So we'll see what that will be.
Well, does your church stay involved with the Habitat too?
We do, but we also support other organizations as well. We've become active in the Greater Hartford GH Interfaith Action Alliance, which is an organization that's working, an organization of religious and nonprofit organizations in Hartford and the surrounding area to address some of the problems of people that are disadvantaged. And so there's a lot of social justice activity going on in trying to figure out how do we need to work better to serve people who are underserved.
Wow. And who is it that seeks these people out? Do you have some sort of a networking thing where you can find out who they are? Do you talk to certain social agencies?
Right, through the social agencies or the other folks, also the GHIAA, Action Alliance, I have to get the acronym in the right order, is also looking at policies, for instance, like bail reform and how we support people who are in the criminal justice system to get out of it. So they're looking at policy things, anti-racism policies and things like that, as well. Then organizations within Hartford, like Hands on Hartford or South Park Inn, have amazing resources to identify the people who have actual individual needs that need to be helped.
I know 2 kinds of people that come to my mind when it comes to people who are struggling and unfortunate, impoverished. There are those who would say that they see a person, a homeless person, person going through a dumpster, a person with the bottles in the cart. There are some people who think you got yourself in that predicament. It's your own fault. It's because you're irresponsible, and it's not my responsibility. So just suck it up and
figure it out.
Get on with your life. That's one person. Another person might see the exact same thing and think to themselves, "Therefore, but the grace of God go I." What's the difference between those two people?
To me, I think it is God's grace, right? I think that, God calls us to love our neighbor and love ourselves. And when our neighbors are in need, if we follow God's call, we will reach out and help them. And not like they cannot help themselves, but sometimes the circumstances need us all working together to solve them.
Well, would you say that a person deciding that another person who they know absolutely nothing about is lazy or irresponsible and that's their own fault, isn't that a judgment call?
It is a judgment, and usually it's based on no data.
And what does talking about your religion, your religious sources say about making judgment calls?
That's God's department, not ours.
I read somewhere that judge not lest you be judged.
Lest you be judged, yes. And I think, in every moment in life, each one of us has a time to choose whether we fall victim to our circumstances or rise above them. And I think for me, I would like at the end of the day for people to say, she rose above her circumstances and she did good in the world, right? Because I think if more of us could be a force for good, we would all be in a better place.
Very good, very good. Well, that's a very good place. We're out of time. That's a very good point to end at. Very good thought. Very good sentiments, something to think about. Janet, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I want to thank you for joining us today, sharing your life. A fascinating, interesting, from beginning to end. And I think that your contribution to your fellow human beings, and I remember my mother said something to me when I was young. She said, "Be the reason someone believes in the goodness of people."
Yes, that's beautiful.
And you are one of those people. I'm very, very happy and proud and gratified to have met today a person who's one of those reasons that my mother talked about.
Well, thank you so much. And
thank you.
My goal in life is to be the reason to good.
Okay, thank you. We're through. Thank you very much, everybody, for joining us with a wonderful interview, and I hope to see you next time on the Nonprofit World with Sarah DeGraff as your producer and your hostess. Thank you.